Greetings, everyone. Hope all of you are having an absolutely fantastic day. I am recording on the evening of July 4th. Happy holidays, everyone. You might hear some fireworks outside, so if you do, I apologize. I gotta take my pockets of time to record where I can. We have finally ranked all 11 classes in Pillars of Eternity, so now it's time to review the full list. I am sure there will be plenty of disagreement regarding this video, so let me know down in the comments your personal ranking and any feedback or questions that you have. Obsidian did a fantastic job with the class mechanics, and honestly, all of them are a good time in the right hands. If you want to see more Pillars of Eternity content, there are links in the description to some of my previous work, including the playlist for this series. One final note before we get into the list, let me give a huge thank you to everyone who has liked, commented, provided feedback, and expressed support for the series. It was a lot of fun diving into the mechanics of this amazing game, and all of you made the experience even more enjoyable. Starting all the way at the bottom, number 11 is Monk. More than any other class, Monk got an upgrade in Pillars of Eternity 2 because here I find it wholly underwhelming. Monks steadily get increases to their unarmed damage, allowing you to play as someone who only fights with their fist. While playing this class, if you are damaged, you receive wounds, which can then be used to power special Monk abilities. That makes them great frontline fighters, since they need to get hit consistently to replenish this resource. Unfortunately, Monk comes with significant issues. In my opinion, unlike Barbarian, which greatly benefits from playing in a vulnerable state, Monk's increases in damage don't feel nearly as impactful considering what is being asked of you. There are also not nearly enough items that assist in a Monk playstyle, and most of them just increase the damage of your fist. This pales in comparison to weapons that can be modified with a myriad of different enchantments. There are Monk weapons in the game, but if I have to abandon fists to make things interesting, then what is the point of the class? I know many of you disagree with me on this, and that's okay. I am glad you enjoy it. What's not debatable is that there is very little reactivity to this class. The lack of reactivity especially hurts when you compare it to Zawa, your Monk party member, who has a rich backstory and makes being a Monk far more interesting than you can. So while playing as this class doesn't conflict with role-playing as the Watcher, it also doesn't add anything to it. A different train of thought on this is that the Watcher's story is one of pain and struggle, which directly coincides with the Monk philosophy. I don't see the Watcher's story that way, so this doesn't work for me, but it certainly might work for some of you. Number 10 on the list is Fighter, not necessarily because it's bad, but more so that having it doesn't serve a purpose. Fighters are the second best tanks in the game, which makes them fantastic frontline combatants. Their ability to stack engagement slots technically makes it easier to lock down enemies. Unfortunately, engagement is a finicky mechanic since many enemies have ways to avoid it, allowing them to run past your fighter without taking an attack of opportunity. A bigger issue is that Barbarians, Paladins, and even Monks can all tank while also doing significantly more damage than what Fighter is reasonably capable of. On top of that, Barbarians and Paladins in particular have mechanics that make them much more entertaining to play. In fact, both of those classes can make you feel flat out godlike, and while Fighters can be dominating, they never really reach that tier. Fighter has more reactivity than most of the classes, but again, it's very bland, so these unique dialogues don't really help to flesh out your playthrough. Fighter also clashes hard with your roleplay experiences as a Watcher. Playing as a character who can see the dead, peer into their souls, and glimpse their past lives doesn't really mix with a blockhead who just swings his weapon over and over. Perhaps the largest problem with the class is that your fighter party member is Eder, and he's one of the greatest party members in gaming. Regardless of your playstyle, it just makes sense to bring him along, both from a mechanics and role-playing standpoint. Two fighters are a crowd on your team, so it just makes very little sense to roll this class. Number 9 on the list is Ranger. This class lets you bring along an animal companion who serves as an off-tank and can do some additional damage if you invest in pet talents. This class also gives you several options to improve your range capabilities, making you much more effective with bows or firearms. I am a big fan of having an animal pet in games, so this aspect of it is really cool, and it's also nice you have several different animals to choose from. Unfortunately, this class suffers from the same issue as Fighter, and that it feels very bland and honestly boring to play. You get a couple of archer abilities, but none of them are all that effective, so most of your time is spent doing a regular attack over and over again. Even worse, Ranger is the type of class that does solid consistent damage throughout the game, but, similar again to Fighter, never reaches a godlike tier, which reinforces the monotony of the class even more. Your pet can take a hit, but it cannot reasonably serve as your main tank. It does a little bit of damage, but it's basically a secondary damage dealer at best, and not someone you can consider the heavy hitter of your team. You get a couple of options for abilities pets can use during combat, but all of them are underwhelming, so it's actually best to just have it do a regular attack repeatedly, which, once again, is boring. On top of all this, from a cosmetic standpoint, the pet doesn't change at all. It won't grow, you cannot put armor or accessories on it, and you don't get any special interactions with it. In fact, there's very little Ranger reactivity in the game overall. There's also a strong case to be made that Sagani, your Ranger party member, makes a better Ranger than you. Mechanically, there's very little difference, since even though she has a unique pet, it doesn't get stats that are significantly better than what you have access to. The distinction is, from a role-playing standpoint, Ranger doesn't really fit with what's asked of you as a watcher, while Sagani's backstory and quest fit Ranger like a glove. As you could probably already tell, I consider Ranger and Fighter to be neck and neck, but again, having a pet is really cool, so I rank it a little higher. Number 8 on the list is Druid. Druids have the ability to shapeshift into animal forms and bombard the battlefield with devastating spells. Druids are flat out the best bombers in the game, getting multiple spells that effectively wipe out and debuff large groups of enemies in spectacular fashion. The animal forms are also a lot of fun, essentially allowing you to play as a werewolf if you so choose. Despite all these perks, there are multiple issues that hold Druids back. While changing into animal forms is fun, any armor or equipment on your character becomes irrelevant, and only your animal stats, along with the appropriate talents you have selected, are taken into account. Consequently, shapeshifting is absolutely brutal in the early game, but by late game you are significantly lagging behind other party members in both damage and defense. Even worse, Druid spells are per rest, which means it's a finite resource that you refill every time you camp. That means Druids are at their very best fresh from a rest, but over time as you fight, their effectiveness gets lower and lower. Consequently, you are always playing the role of manager, trying to hold back your best spells to ensure they are available for boss or elite encounters. This gets somewhat easier as you get more spell slots, but never completely goes away, especially compared to other classes who can basically go all out every fight. Druids get the lowest amount of reactivity out of all the classes in the game, which really doesn't make sense considering there are multiple quests where Druids are directly involved. There's a strong case to be made that Huravias, your Druid party member, is a much better representation of the class than you can be. He gets a unique animal form along with an incredible backstory that provides a lot of details regarding cultures in the game. Being a watcher doesn't clash with Druid, but again, there's no reactivity, so consequently I think watching Huravias' story is more satisfying than playing as a Druid yourself. Next at number 7 we have Chanter. This is Obsidian's take on Bard, a class that can sing songs to buff party members, debuff enemies, and also deal explosive damage on the field. Chanters are definitely one of the most powerful classes in the game, capable of completely shutting down or wiping out large groups of enemies. Even better, their songs are not per rest abilities, so unlike some other classes, Chanters don't have to get ready because they are always ready. In addition, while there's nothing wrong with the stat distribution for your Chanter party member, Kana, I cannot stand his nasal voice, so that bumps up the rating for Chanter a bit as well. Unfortunately, at first glance, making use of Chanter mechanics is complicated as all hell and poorly explained in the game. You need to enter a menu that organizes phrases and overlaps them while slowly unlocking the ability to use more powerful invocations. Phrases are usually small effects that buff the party or deal a small but consistent amount of damage. Invocations are more powerful effects that can range from paralyzing or charming multiple enemies to summoning allies or even damaging groups of foes. The system is not hard once you understand it, but again, the game should do a better job of providing clarity. Ironically, the other major issue with Chanter is that it can be quite boring to play, because once you have untangled its mechanics and set up the songs, everything works automatically. You can manually use invocations if you like, but there's still not nearly as many moving parts as other classes provide. Plus, there's a strong case to be made that you get all the phrases and invocations you will use halfway through the game. Chanter lacks the feel of consistent progression that most other classes have. On top of all this, Chanters have the second worst amount of reactivity in the game. So similar to Druids, even though Chanter doesn't clash with role-playing as a Watcher, there's so little reactivity that they don't really add anything either. Number 6 is Rogue. Rogues do the most single target damage of any class and are basically the boss killers of the group. This happens due to a combination of increased damage on enemies who have specific afflictions, increased critical hit chance, and they can deal more damage against enemies with large health pools who have already taken damage. As a trade-off, rogues are glass cannons who can be cut down just as easily as they cut enemies down. All of this makes them extremely satisfying to play with, because getting the most out of rogues require you not only to manage their mechanics well in a fight, but also the rest of your team to ensure enemies are properly debuffed and tanks are taking the heat, allowing you to freely operate as an agent of chaos. Your rogue companion, Devil of Karak, has a fantastic story, but an armor slot is fixed, preventing you from taking advantage of all the great light armors in the game. So not only does it make sense for you to create your own rogue, but honestly, if you have your team set up around a rogue, then it makes sense to take 2 of them for maximum damage. Unfortunately, one of the strengths I mentioned is also the class's biggest weakness. Getting the most out of Rogue requires a ton of micromanagement in combat. If enemies don't have afflictions which trigger sneak attacks, Rogue is useless. Rogues cannot tank, and frankly, they are not good off tanks either, so too much heat and you'll have to bail. This means you'll have to care for every little aspect of combat just to stay on your feet. Some of you are probably hearing this and saying, man, that sounds fantastic, but for me, it's too much. Playing as a rogue feels unnecessarily cumbersome. It also doesn't help that there's very little reactivity in the world for a rogue playthrough, and the class doesn't mesh particularly well with role-playing as a watcher either. Next on the list at number 5 is Barbarian, and this is where we have crossed a threshold. The 5 remaining classes are all god tier in their own way. Barbarians' claim to fame is that each hit from their weapon will also hit all nearby enemies. You can increase intelligence to widen the range at which this shockwave occurs, to the point that every swing is basically damaging all the enemies on your screen. Barbarians can also gain more damage depending on how low their health is. This lets you use a playstyle where the barbarian is constantly on the brink of death, but also annihilating whole swaths of enemies. It's absolutely a blast to play this way, and Barbarian is a ton of fun. In addition, while I like the backstory of Minea, the barbarian party member, she honestly doesn't come off much like a barbarian, so it's a rather weird mix. 2 barbarians on the team are a crowd, but I would have no reservations about benching her and spinning up my own. The issue with Barbarian is that it takes a while to come into its own. At first you'll have to enter combat with heavier armor because the Barbarian will be too squishy to use lighter armor that allows for more sword swings. It will also take some time before your team is prepared for you to walk around with low health at all times. So unfortunately, Barbarian spends a good portion of the game kind of feeling like a fighter. Finally, it's yet another class with very little reactivity in the game, and frankly, being a lumbering, angry blockhead doesn't fit particularly well with your role as a watcher. Coming in at number 4 is Wizard. Wizards are the best debuffers in the game, capable of quickly flinging multiple spells that set enemies up for massive damage. There's a lot of versatility in how you approach their abilities. As mentioned, they are great debuffers, but you can also summon weapons and make them melee specialists, or even specialize in ranged damage with spells like Fireball and Chain Lightning. To use spells, you must have a grimoire, and enemy spellcasters will drop their own grimoires, which sometimes have unique spells you cannot select during level ups. This creates a super cool system where defeating some spellcasters will provide different functionality for you. Your wizard party member Aloth is perfectly serviceable, but there are multiple ways to play wizard, so having 2 of them on the team is not a crowd at all. In addition, playing as a wizard complements being a watcher very well. Seeing souls and the manner in which people have passed doesn't at all feel out of place with the rest of what you do. What I don't like about wizards is that most of their spells are per rest, which means they have similar action economy issues to Druid. Their balance is a little bit better due to a blast talent that allows their regular attacks to impact multiple enemies, but the issue still remains. Also, while they do have damage focused spells, the majority of them are subpar. Druids are significantly more effective at using spells to wipe out out groups of enemies. The highest damage wizard build has you summoning a staff and charging into melee. This feels very wrong to me and lowers the ranking of the overall class. Also, not to sound like a broken record, but this class gets very little reactivity in the game, and honestly, that feels worse for wizards than it does for other classes. The reason for this is because Pillars of Eternity has a circle of Archmagi that is composed of the most powerful wizards in the land. Being a powerful wizard of wealth and authority in this game is a big deal, so it's really weird to me that there's not a bigger reaction to you being a wizard watcher who has your own army, vast wealth, and whose arcane knowledge has skyrocketed to using spells at the very highest level. That feels like a more noticeable gap compared to other classes. Before we review the top 3 classes, let me remind you that the channel has a free Discord available for you to join, and the link is in the description. If you enjoyed this video, I would also appreciate you hitting the like button. It really helps the channel out, and if you want to support this kind of content, please consider becoming a member of the channel where you will get access to full playthrough episodes. Alright, we have finally reached the top 3 classes, and starting at number 3, we have Paladin. Paladins are the best tanks in the game, capable of pushing their defenses to astronomical heights while at the same time buffing and healing the entire party. Seriously, they can put the entire team on their backs and carry campaigns. There are a wide range of mechanics that allow them to do this, making Paladins a ton of fun to play, both because of what you have control over and also due to how little hand-holding they actually require. During character creation, you will choose from a list of Paladin orders, all of which have their own lore and backstory within the world. While the class itself has almost no reactivity, each Paladin order does, to the point Paladin ranks 3rd in this category. Consequently, role-playing as a watcher with Paladin is a ton of fun, not only because the class doesn't conflict at all with your role, but also because the world actually reacts to the choice that you have made. Pallegina, your Paladin party member, is absolutely fantastic, both from a mechanical and story-wise perspective. She also gets a unique Paladin order, so there's a case to be made that you cannot become a better Paladin than her. Despite this, it totally makes sense for you to make your own Paladin, not only because they do incredible damage, but also while you cannot stack the same Paladin aura, different Paladin auras do stack, so having 2 of them on the team allows you to take greater advantage of all the fantastic Paladin buffs. Paladin only has one drawback. As I mentioned before, the reactivity you get in the world is strongly tied to your Paladin order, and unfortunately, they do not all get the same amount of love. Make sure you choose carefully. Number 2 on the list is Cypher, which is basically Obsidian's interpretation of a warlock. This class builds up a focus resource by damaging enemies, and then it uses that focus to unleash chaos. This means that Cyphers are pretty much always at their very best because none of their abilities are per rest, as opposed to classes like Druid or Wizard that are fantastic fresh off a rest, but then over time become harder and harder to use. The variety of powers you can use with Cypher is also fantastic, as they can play the part of damage dealer, debuffer, or sometimes even buffer, all in the same fight on the fly. In addition, Cyphers get the most reactivity out of all the classes in the game. Honestly, outside of a priest who makes exactly the right decisions during character creation, Cyphers get significantly more reaction than all of the other classes. These are not just throwaway lines either. Many of the unique dialogue Cyphers are capable of fit the watcher like a glove, and indeed, this class more than any other feels like the canon Pillars of Eternity playthrough. Grieving Mother, your Cypher party member, is perfectly serviceable as a Cypher, but due to her backstory, she has significantly less banter than all of the rest of your party members. Consequently, taking her along oftentimes feels like there's a black hole in the party, so it absolutely makes sense to spin your own Cypher and stick her on the bench. Even if you decide to keep her, 2 Cyphers are not a crowd, as oftentimes throwing out the same Cypher powers over and over is very beneficial. Bottom line, there is just no drawback to playing as a Cypher, and the only reason it is stuck at number 2 is because number 1 is so incredible. Finally, we have arrived at number 1, and of course, it is Priest. For those of you who have already played the game, this is probably no surprise. More than any other class, Priest changes your playthrough because they have access to the best team-wide buffs in the game. A single Priest buff can be the difference between losing a fight or absolutely mopping the floor with your enemies. In addition to the incredible buffs, they are also the best healers in the game, great debuffers, and they can do fantastic damage to single targets or a large group of enemies. Even though their spells are per rest, they don't suffer from the same action economy issues that Wizard and Druid face because you don't need to pump out a lot of cleric spells every fight. Oftentimes, 1 or maybe 2 spells is all you need to ensure your party's victory. Priests get the second most reactivity in the game, especially if you choose the correct background and deities. As far as effectively role-playing the Watcher, Priest is second only to Cypher, because obviously giving souls peace and helping them pass it to the Beyond synergizes directly with your class. In addition, your Priest party member, Durance, comes with a poor stat distribution for a cleric. Therefore, despite his fantastic story, it absolutely makes your party more effective to bench him and create your own priest who could throw out the needed buffs much faster. Or you can get really crazy and roll with 2 priests at one time. That completes my ranking of all the classes in Pillars of Eternity and also completes all the content that I plan to do for this game. It was a fantastic experience putting all of this together, and I am looking forward to diving into the sequel. Hope all of you enjoyed this video. Take care!